Hey everybody, this is Mike with BuzzTox, and today we're going to go over episode 5 of HBO's Watchmen. Be warned, we have spoilers ahead for this episode as we go deep into the show. This was, without a doubt, the best episode so far. I can't believe how much was covered in this episode. We got to learn about Looking Glass, and we finally got a few answers with Adrian's storyline, which again inspired a ton of questions. So let's dive in. This is our much-awaited Looking Glass episode. We finally go in depth with this character, and it was quite a ride. We learn, as I predicted a few episodes back, that Looking Glass was traumatized as a young man because he was present during that squid event in New York City. The opening scene shows us what the alternate world of Watchmen in 1985 was like. The Doomsday Clock is reading 1 minute to midnight, and we are near the end of the comic series, on the brink of nuclear war between the US and the USSR. We learn that Looking Glass was a young missionary at this time, trying to spread the word of God to the people of Hoboken, New Jersey. He's nervous, and this must be his first bit of missionary work. He approaches some kids, and this is actually an Easter egg to the comics, as they're members of the Top Knot gang. You see the little top knot on the guys' heads. Members of this gang broke into the original Night Owl's home in the comics and they killed him. And this was actually one of the better scenes in the Watchmen movie as the old man relived his days as a costumed adventurer, so check that out. We also see a young man reading the Black Freighter comic in this scene, which is a big part of the original the Watchmen comic. The back of the magazine has an ad for the Veidt method, and this is a self-improvement guide written by Adrian Veidt. A girl leads him into a funhouse filled with mirrors, and we think we're getting this coming-of-age moment with the character having his first sexual encounter, and instead it turns into this traumatic moment as she runs off with his clothes, leaving him tricked, embarrassed, and filled with self-hatred. Ironically, his rage in this traumatic moment, screaming at his own reflection, is likely the only thing that saved him from the psychic wave which killed half of New York City the moment the giant squid was transported to New York by Veidt. Veidt explained in the comics that when the squid was dropped in New York, it would die immediately. Its death would cause this psychic shockwave, killing millions. Those who didn't die immediately would be driven insane by this broadcasted signal that was within that psychic wave, which was filled with this terrible information, and that the sensitives around the world, people that were slightly psychic, they'd have nightmares about the event for years to come. In this scene, we see Looking Glass and a handful of others survive the shockwave, and then we pan out to New York, finally getting that squid scene of the attack which Snyder avoided completely in his 2009 movie. We learn throughout the episode the deep-seated mental trauma of the events of that day, which affected Wade, Looking Glass, for the rest of his life. He's been overwhelmed by fear, and he's presented to the audience as a pitiful but endearing individual with these classic Midwestern values who masks his own anxiety by speaking tersely and honestly. He does not abide a liar because he can spot one so plainly. He was tricked by one, the girl in the funhouse, and he won't let it happen again. Just like he won't be a victim of the squid attacks again. In the scene later on, Laurie Blake tells the police to start looking for the church that was in the 7th Cavalry video, and then she goes and interviews Looking Glass. She lets him know that his desk has been bugged, and she lets him know that she knows all about his past. Laurie suspects that he joined the police after the White Knight so that he could wear the reflectine all the time, protecting himself from any squid psychic blast which might happen in the future. And this reflectine, the Looking Glass mask is made out of, is a product made by this company called Extra Dimensional Securities. And that LG also uses that to line the inside of his hat. So he's paranoid about another attack coming at any time. And he has a lot of these extra-dimensional security products in his shelter. We see their magazines all over the place. And in his shelter, he runs these endless emergency drills to keep him sharp in case of another attack. This paranoia fills his life. We see on the walls of his shelter that he's earned a degree in extraterrestrial squid science, which is a thing in this world. So he's become obsessed. A, with trying to stop it, and B, with trying to learn all about it. We saw in the last episode that he would photograph squid showers, trying to learn as much about them, about the little ones, as he could before they dissolve. He stores his looking glass masks and his truck in a storage unit, and he uses his skills as this human lie detector as a consult for ad companies in his secret identity. We see the ad campaign where people are trying to get back into New York City, bring the tourism back, and we learn that not only him, but a large portion of the public are still fearful from the events of 1985, and New York is largely avoided for tourism. Later on, we see him again in his role as a consultant, this time for Smiley-O's. This is a reference to the comedian. And then we see him visit this pet cloning facility where his ex-wife works. And I love her line in this, the intro, where she says, "I see the hat is back." And it's brilliant in that it shows that Looking Glass has struggled with his anxiety, and that he's made good progression away from the paranoia in the past. These are good days gone by between the two of them. But the line also lets us know that this was a point of conflict between the two of them, which ultimately led to their divorce. And it also shows us that she knows that right now he isn't in a good place and that he hasn't changed at all. No matter what he says, he's still wearing that hat. Now she tells him that the pills that were left by Will for Angela are nostalgia memory implanting drugs. Now, nostalgia is also a reference to a perfume which was made by Veidt Industries, popular in the 1980s. It's shown in the comics again. It's unclear whether this was a Veidt product. I imagine it's a product designed by Lady True, and that she's been giving the same drug to her daughter, shown in the last episode having nightmares. These nightmares were actually the memories of Lady True, or maybe True's mother in Vietnam. We see Angela take these pills at the end of the episode, and I imagine we'll have a nice montage scene in the next episode where she relives the memories of her grandfather. I think that it's Hooded Justice, so I imagine that we'll see more of his real story rather than the ones that depicted for us in the hero story on TV. Back to Looking Glass, we see him leading a group therapy session for those with extraterrestrial anxiety. He lies to them, saying he's lost his fear. And this is just one of his many coping mechanisms. He'll try to help others, thinking that that will help heal himself. And this is probably the same reason he became a cop. All of it stemming from this missionary background, believing that he can make a difference to others. And I was happy to see the intro of Paula Malcolmson in this episode. I love her from Ray Donovan and Deadwood. And I enjoyed her background story about being obsessed with the Pale Horse movie. And we get a little alternative universe play here with the Spielberg Red Girl scene shown in this reality in the movie Pale Horse rather than our own where he used it in Schindler's List. And I saw it coming that she was 7th Cavalry, though she was sent to bring Looking Glass over to their side. But I thought that he was just being picked because he was a local that was higher up in the police department who didn't have a long history with the police department. I didn't see the reveal of the senator coming in this episode. Many people assumed that he and Judd were up to no good, but in this church scene, we're told by the senator that he's become involved with the 7th Cavalry after the White Knight. He's now their leader, supposedly keeping them in check. And he and Judd had conspired to rein in both the cavalry and the police department after the events of the White Knight. We see that the 7th Cavalry is testing out this transportation device, and this is a bit of Dr. Manhattan tech, which Veidt used to transport the squid to New York. We learn that the senator knows the truth of what happened in 1985, and that this is what's driving him to make plans with the 7th Cavalry. He will expose the lie from 1985, with his endgame being president. And it's unclear yet whether or not he's conspiring alongside Lady True and Will. Let me know what you think about this. Looking Glass is told the truth will set him free, and it's apparent by him choosing to watch the video that Looking Glass wants to change. He hasn't given up hope that he will see the light in the tunnel. Once learning the truth, he has no choice but to turn in Angela. He thinks that she's going to stop others from knowing the truth, and he feels remorse for this action, but he knows that Angela represents the lies which defined his life. He must be completely overwhelmed by the events of the evening, and we see him throw out his new alarm system only to immediately pick it back up. He doesn't know who he is anymore. He doesn't know what to fear anymore. But the retrieval of the alarm means that there will always be something else in this world that he's going to be afraid of. Or maybe he's being more realistic, and now that he knows the full extent of the Senator's plans, he might know that he might need that alarm very soon. Now we switch over to Adrian Veidt, and this is, again, just great stuff in his storyline. We see him finally making a proper spacesuit with this Greco-Roman styled helmet, referencing his love, again, for Alexander the Great, which we've seen throughout the series. He catapults himself out of his enclosure. We finally learn that he is in space. And was that Jupiter that we saw in the background? So he's likely on its largest moon, let's say Titan, which is being orbited by this satellite. We learn why he said that the dead bodies would be useful later as he arranges the corpses into this SOS message on the surface of the moon. And this is a reference to the Black Freighter storyline in the comics, where the sailor uses the corpses of his shipmates in order to construct this raft which saves his life. Now Adrian gets pulled back into the enclosure on his rope line, echoing the villain being pulled by the rope from the hero in the very first scene of episode 1. He crashes back into the enclosure. Is this a different dimension, or is it a hologram? And he's taken under arrest by the games warden for his actions. The warden mentions God, and Adrian responds saying that their God has abandoned them. And the warden responds that he's right. Their God has left, and he's unlikely to return. And I believe this is referencing Dr. Manhattan. At the end of the comics series, Manhattan said he was bored with life on Earth, so he'd be leaving and would perhaps make some life of his own. And I believe that that's what we have here. This enclosure was a giant experiment by Dr. Manhattan in the creation of life, a new life form. And somehow Adrian's become involved. Perhaps he too was tired of humanity. Remember that Veidt Industries fell after the events in the 90s as people abandoned technology, so he didn't have the money he had before. He sold his assets to Lady True, deciding to join Dr. Manhattan on this moon, maybe to tutor these new life forms and live out his last days in this artificial paradise. Alternatively, he might have known that Dr. Manhattan had already abandoned his experiment on this moon, and he's gone there again in retirement, but that retirement's become a prison. We're now going to see him truly in prison within the enclosure, and we'll see the chaos that the clones get into without his guidance. And I believe that they're going to organize his escape, and that the Save Me sign will be intercepted, and that's either going to be by Redford, who we learn is really his lackey, and he owes him, or Lady True. Let us know what you think will happen next, and let me know what you thought of Looking Glass. Will he survive the next episode? I really hope he makes it out. I love what they've done with him so far, and I believe they could still do a lot more with his story arc. So thanks. Remember to like, subscribe, and keep watching.